I say well done to those that have pointed out that there's an awful lot of people with an awful lot of money, an awful lot of government money that is there behind Virgin, and the idea that Richard Branson is sooking into his Instagram about government bailouts while he owns an island is crazy. Now, I love Virgin. I've got 100,000 points with them. They've taken great care of my family, no question about it. I admire the people who work there. I really do. But this was interesting stuff in the news.com.au today, that the second biggest airline in Australia, 90% foreign-owned, Etihad, which is of course, Abu Dhabi, Singapore Airlines, Chinese conglomerates, as well as the Virgin Group. Behind those names are some of the highest profile billionaires, Virgin's Richard Branson and Abu Dhabi, and their insanely wealthy royal family. Here is the Virgin administrator talking about up to 10 separate companies and venture capitalists, etc., are all interested in stepping up and buying.
There has been an extraordinary amount of interest in the business and in the restructuring of Virgin Australia. So we are confident that this will result in a restructuring being achieved in a short period of time. As I said, we have not changed anything in respect to the operations or the employees are continuing to be employed. There is no plans to make any redundancies.
Now, again, Cory, I understand the darkness of these times, and my support for this airline is absolute. We need two of them in the skies. But the idea that, as Albo, etc., were trying to argue, we've got to hand over money before things got to this perilous state, when it's not an Australian company, its ownership is clearly in other places, but other places that virtually have limitless funds to pour into their own domestic carriers, such as Etihad and Singapore. So, to me, it's an unfortunate bump, but it feels like with 10 people lining up to buy it, including the very people who own the airports in Australia, this isn't a terrible situation.
Paul, what would be a terrible situation would be if Virgin ceased to exist and couldn't keep flying, and we had an airline monopoly effectively in this country. I love Virgin. I want to see them keep going, but there's no way we should be bailing out some of the wealthiest sovereign wealth funds or some of the richest individuals in the world. And the only alternative to that would be, from my point of view, as a small government person, and this is a bit of a wedge, is that if Virgin was going to collapse and it was not going to exist anymore, well then maybe, just maybe, a few $1 billion from the government could be done. They could end up virtually owning it and carrying it through until it could be sold if the administrators weren't going to do it. But it looks optimistic. I hope that's the case because we need competitive skies. And quite frankly, I'd be kind of happy if the government wanted to deregulate a little bit more and let some international airlines come in and provide some support on domestic routes if that was in our national interest too.
Yeah. Stephen, what do you think about this here?
And I'm Bernie Sanders. Cory Bernardi just nationalised an airline live on it.
He did too.
Seriously.
No.
Help me out here, Paul. I'll just speak to the flight.
He's happy for China Air to fly between Sydney and Melbourne.
Yeah, not happening.
You too.
Oh, now I'm Bernie Sanders.
Oh dear, he's blushing. I haven't seen Cory blush in a long time.
That's a tan, mate. That's a tan.
Look, I mean, in terms of Virgin, tough issue. We've got to have two airlines. If the government have been playing bluff with some creditors in the marketplace, some of the owners, what we want to see is it come out of administration and continue to provide the good service that it's been provided. It's drowned in its debt. The debt will not be part of, obviously, it going forward, coming out of the voluntary administration. So I've got hopes that, I can't believe a company like Singapore Airlines is not absolutely gagging to take it over at what will be a relatively cheap price compared to if it had jumped in previously, because it gives access to the most lucrative route in the world, and that's the east coast of Australia to the west coast of the US. So that's because there's only a very small number of airlines allowed to fly it. So I think Singapore should be absolutely putting its checkbook on the table and picking it up. It's got a viable, competitive situation it can be in Australia as a second domestic carrier, and it gets access to one of the most profitable routes in the world. And it also can then use its domestic carrier to funnel Australians into its main international Singapore Airlines fleet going through Singapore, which many Australians have been used to doing for a long time, but they could do it all the way on Singapore Airlines.